Okay, so let's remember, we're trying to solve this accrued interest expense problem. And you remember our 5 steps here? What we want to think about first is what's required for the solution. So what is required? Well, we need all journal entries. And so we want to think about what that means. And when we look at the problem, right, let's think about our timeline here. Here's 2013. And we need all the journal entries in 2013. And so, right, the bonds are issued on 6/1/13. And they pay interest on May 31st of 2014. So what we have to think about here is what entries do we need in 2013? Well, we definitely need an entry for the issuance of the bonds. And the big question is, do we need anything else? Well, remember, the company has a fiscal year end of 12/31. And so remember, we needed an accrued interest entry. And so we're going to have to do a journal entry on 12/31, an adjusting entry. And so, right, we want to think about kind of what's required for the solution. Well, we need the issuance and then the adjusting entry. So the big question is what's known and what's not known in this problem. So let's think about what's known. And so when we think about what's known, well, we know the face value, and that equals $2 million. And we know the stated rate, and the stated rate is 9%. And we know the effective rate, and the effective rate is 10%. And we know the dates, right? So the date is June 1st. That's the issuance date, and May 31st, right? That is the payment date. And then let's think about what's not known. So what are the things that are not known? Let me just go to the next sheet here. What's not known? Things that we have to figure out. Well, right, the big thing that we need to know is the selling price. Right, so we have to figure that out. And we're going to have to figure out the interest payment. That's not given. That's not known right off the bat. And then we have to do interest expense. That's the other thing that's not given and that we have to figure out. And once we've done that, right, we have to think about this and what do we have to provide for the answer in terms of accounting? Well, we need a journal entry, so we need to know debits and credits. So remember, when we issue bonds, we're going to debit cash. That's going to be the debit. And we're going to credit bonds payable. And then remember, we're going to have a bond discount or a bond premium depending on the situation. So remember, when the effective rate is greater than the stated rate, right, we're going to have a bond discount. And when the effective rate is less than the stated rate, we'll have a bond premium. So there's our issuance. Remember, for interest, and it's right accrued, because we're not making the payment, right? We're going to have interest expense that's going to be the debit. We're going to have interest payable. That's going to be our credit. And then we're going to have amortization. And remember, the amortization depends on whether it's a discount or a premium. And so that's what we need in terms of accounting. So let's do the solution here, and let's figure this out. So when we think about our solution here, remember, when we put it into the financial calculator, we want to figure out first the selling price of the bond. And right, that's the first thing that we don't know and we have to calculate. So N equals 10. Remember, on our financial calculator, the interest rate per year is the effective interest rate. Remember, that's also 10. That's our effective rate. And then we have the payment. Remember, that's the interest payment. This is another of those unknowns. And remember, that's the stated rate times the face value. So 9% times $2 million. And so that's going to be $180,000. Remember, this is a cash outflow, so on the financial calculator, we'll make it a negative. And then remember, the future value is how much we have to pay at the very end. And that's the face value, $2 million. And it's an outflow, and so what we're going to do is make it negative. And what we're trying to solve for is the present value, how much we would receive today. And if we put all that in, we get a value of 1,000,000, and I'm going to round here, 877,109. And that's our selling price. Well, remember, we had two more unknowns. We had our interest payment, and remember, we're going to first look at it on an annual basis. And that interest payment, again, is right from our calculation on the table. And so it's $180,000 a year. Remember, since we're doing effective interest amortization, we have interest expense. And interest expense on an annual basis, for that first year, it's always the effective rate times the carrying value of the bond. Well, it's easy that first year because it's 10% times the initial selling price, 877,109, and that's going to give us annual interest expense for that first year of 187,711, right? And we want to make sure, right? So remember, when it's sold at a discount, the interest expense should be greater than the interest payment, and that's right. So now we have everything necessary to do our final solution here. In our solution, right, let me add a page. We can go back, and for the issuance, remember, what we want to do for the journal entry is what we have first is our date, and remember, the date of these bonds is June 1st, 2012. 2013. And what we're going to debit is cash, and that's the selling price of the bond, $1,877,109. And we're also going to debit bond discount. And that's the difference between the selling price and the face value of the bonds, and that's going to be $122,891. And then the credit, you remember we indent, is going to be bond payable, and that's always the face value of the bond, $2 million. All right. So now, right, remember the second thing we had to do for the journal entries for 2013 is do the accrued interest as of 2013, December 31st fiscal year end. And that's going to be interest expense and remember, let's do the debits and credit. Remember, we have to get rid of this bond discount. So I'm going to credit bond discount. And remember that I'm not paying the interest yet, so it's going to be interest payable. Now, what we did on that last page is we did annual amounts. So we always have to multiply this by just the number of months in 2013. And since June to December 31st is 7 months. So we want to remember on our timeline those 7 months. So remember the interest expense would have been $187,711. I want to take that times 712. So it's going to be $109,498. And my interest payable, remember, was $180,000. Again, times 7/12, it's going to be $105,000. And then the difference between those two is the amount of discount amortized, which would be $4,498. And we've solved our problem. So remember the 5-step approach, right? What's going to be required for the solution? Second thing is what is known and what needs to be known, right? So what's been given in the problem, what needs to be calculated, figure out. What's the solution in accounting terms? What's the journal entry? What are the debits and credits that we need to solve for? And then provide our solution. Now, last step, right? Check your answer. Right? Check your neighbor or the person that you're working with and see if they got the same solution. All right. So that's accrued interest amortization.